So, stuck inside for a bit. Guess that gives me a lot of time to check out an old Spider-Man TV series that I never really gave a fair crack back in the day. This is MTV's SpiderMan, the new animated series. What's crack-a-lackin', fellow home dogs? It's your old quarantine buddy channel pup, and today we're taking a little look back at MTV's Spider-Man, the new animated series. The show was co-developed for TV by Brian Michael Bendis, and it really shows. Brian Michael Bendis was the main pioneer behind the Ultimate Comics line at Marvel Comics, and this show, Spider-Man, the new animated series, was originally conceived as inspired by the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, which was the big new thing in the early 2000s. But you know what else was a big new thing in the early 2000s? Actually, let's reword that. You know what else was a much bigger thing in the early 2000s? The success of Spidey's big screen debut, directed by Sam Raimi. And subsequently, the show was reworked to follow that continuity. So we have a Spider-Man TV series that takes place in the universe of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man? Oh boy, yeah. The show was also pitched more at an older audience than your typical Spider-Man cartoon, dealing with much more mature themes. What else was exciting at the time this show came out was the use of 3D computer animation. Now, I only watched one episode of this show when I was much younger, and I think it was after the show had ended. I think I watched this around the time of Spider-Man 3's release, and it was the very first episode about the party and Max Dillon becoming Electro. And I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was just something about the show I didn't like. Something about it felt cold to me. And I think that is just because it is a much more mature Spider-Man show than I was ever used to it. It looks like this candy-colored cartoon, and you got lots of reds and blues in all the title text, and it looks like a cartoon for kids. Like, this is definitely a more recent point of reference, but I think the animation here very much reminds me of Star Wars Resistance in a lot of ways. This looks like the kind of thing you would expect to see on Disney XD, I guess. But the show focuses much more on the sort of relationships between Peter Parker, Mary Jane, and Harry Osborn. This is not the candy-colored overstimulation fest that the opening titles would necessarily suggest it is. And speaking of opening titles, my god. So let's get one thing out of the way here. This show is dated. I know the animation is a bit of an easy target, and I'm not going to pick on that, because to be honest, to be fair, I don't think the animation has even aged that badly. Sure, it's a little bit janky compared to other things that use 3D cel-shaded animation these days, but I think you could still air this today, and you wouldn't necessarily know it was from the mid-2000s if it wasn't for this other aspect. The music. You've got this thumping mid-2000s rave music playing the entire time, which is a far cry from the Danny Elfman orchestral splashes of the actual Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, of which this is supposed to share a universe with. This isn't really a criticism though, because I know that this was not originally intended to be in that universe. And that's the thing, you take kind of primitive, cel-shaded 3D computer animation, you take early 2000s thumping disco music, you take inspiration from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man film trilogy, and you take inspiration from the early run of Brian Michael Bendis' Ultimate Comics Spider-Man. This is like the ultimate time capsule of the early 2000s, and for that, it doesn't get much more nostalgic than this. I think if you want the definitive piece of early 2000s Marvel media, this is absolutely it. If you want to just re-experience the early 2000s through a Marvel-themed lens, this is it. This is your show. And in some regards, I've developed a bit of a fondness for this. I mean, when I was a kid, I really did not like the thumping disco music. I was never into that kind of music as a kid. I was more of a Sum 41 kind of a guy. So, how did the Sam Raimi films impact this show? Well, Spider-Man's costume is very reminiscent of the original Spider-Man 1 costume. You've got your raised shiny webs, you've got your spider emblems on the front and back, which are exactly the same as the ones from the first film, which you rarely see ever these days. On any Spider-Man media or on the internet or anything, it's always the 2004 model Raimi logo, so it's kind of nice to see those get a bit more use here. This costume kind of looks like if Mark Bagley's Ultimate Spider-Man stuck on a Zentai suit of the 2002 suit, and then thought, hey, I'm gonna put on some Todd McFarlane-style lenses. And to be honest, it's a really nice match. I would love to see a remastering of this character model someday, because this is a really cool look for Spidey. So, otherwise, for Raimi influence, I guess the logo kind of looks like the Sam Raimi one. It's a little more tilted, but still. And, yeah, that's about it. It was promoted as being a bit more in the universe of those films, but generally it's just an Ultimate Spider-Man TV show, really. It does take that deeper dive into the sort of social life of Peter Parker, but you don't have things like Gwen Stacy, which the Ultimate comics had. For main characters, they just kind of keep it to the three: Peter Parker, MJ, Harry Osborn. And with that deeper dive, you can see that these are definitely not the versions that we see in the films. Peter Parker wears purple pants and short sleeve shirts over long sleeve shirts, which is such a dated look, which I haven't totally accidentally replicated at some point. Yeah, I mean, who owns purple pants, right? I own purple pants. This was all part of this kind of incentive to make Spider-Man and his friends a bit more hip for younger audiences. And in the same vein, Aunt May was not allowed to appear in the show due to fear of putting off a younger audience. They were worried that if they had an elderly character in their show, it wouldn't match the hip demographic they want watching it. Oh my god, is that a fucking old person I see on TV? Old people aren't hip. I'm turning this off now. Like, really, how fucking stupid do they think we are? Harry Osborn is definitely not modeled after James Franco. In fact, he looks a lot more like that one guy from Glee. You know, he was a really good character. What was the name again? And then MJ looks a lot more like her Ultimate counterpart. All of this was a bit more grounded and contemporary at the time, drawing a little bit away from the old school archetypes that made the Spider-Man characters the way that they were, and how they were more represented in the animated series that preceded this, and making them feel a bit more like characters from, say, MTV's The Hills. Only a little bit more. Not much more, but only a little bit. Heck, even the way dialogue scenes are directed in this, it feels a bit more like your average MTV show. And I think, again, it's because obviously aimed more at adults this time. So as for the actual content, the story takes place after the death of Norman Osborn. So we're picking up after Spider-Man 1. Peter, MJ, and Harry are now all attending Empire State University. And Peter's pursuits of Mary Jane appear to be going a little bit stale. Not just because of his Spider-Man duties, but because he begins dating a new character, Indira Daimonji. It is still something of a love triangle though, and I really feel bad for Indy in this, because, well, we all know that MJ is Peter's endgame, and he's still very much interested in her while dating Indy. Even as an adult, I don't like that. But for a more mature Spider-Man, I get it, we're steering away from that sort of idealistic Spider-Man. It's kind of like the John Romita Sr. era of Spider-Man, where he's kind of got to choose between two love interests, and he's got a lot of growing up to do with that. It's that part of that coming of age story, basically. I don't know, I think I just find love triangles generally frustrating. This is a me thing, this is not a criticism of the show. In some ways, this show can also draw up an immediate parallel with a Batman TV series called Beware the Batman. It was the first Batman series to be done entirely in CGI animation, and it featured a much smaller roster of familiar Batman villains. The same can be said of this show. I mean, you have got Kraven the Hunter, the Lizard, and Electro, and then outside of that you have... I don't know who you are. But the big bad of the series is these two psychic twins, who want revenge on Kraven the Hunter, so they create a scenario in Peter's head where Kraven the Hunter kills Mary Jane right in front of his very eyes, and then Stan Lee convinces him to get revenge and murder Kraven the Hunter. Definitely one of the darker Stan Lee cameos, wouldn't you say? Spider-Man almost murders Kraven right there and then until he realizes that he's been duped the whole time. He then sets out to rescue Mary Jane and defeat... Mindy and Vargas. And Spidey's choking Mindy on the edge of this really tall building until she falls off the edge. But then, uh-oh, got a little twister-rooney right here. Turns out he was manipulated. That wasn't Mindy, it was... Indy! Ugh, don't you just hate when you push your girlfriend off of a tall building by accident? At least they get that the core of Spider-Man is relatability. Rest in peace, Liz. So he goes off to defeat the twins once and for all. He does that and he gives up being Spider-Man forever. And that's the end of that first season. What a cliffhanger. I can't wait for what comes next. So, plot twist, there is nothing next. This Spider-Man gave up, and he gave up for good. Now, they did have plans to revive it for a second season, but MTV deemed that the ratings were just not enough to warrant a second season, so that's it, show's on ice. There were plans for it, including Vulture and Mysterio, but it just wasn't meant to be. So, wait, if this takes place in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man universe, then the Sam Raimi Spider-Man universe is far more expansive than any of us thought. He becomes Spider-Man, he defeats the Green Goblin, Harry's pissed, he dates a new girl, gets tricked by some psychic twins into pushing her off of a building, the entirety of New York thinks that Spider-Man is a villain now, he gives up, but then I guess when the going gets rough, he uses his spider abilities to deliver pizzas, and then I guess New York is just fine with that after seeing him push Indy off of the skyscraper, and bear in mind he must have just kept a duplicate of his Spider-Man costume on him at all times. Oh boy, yeah. Continuity. So as a little slotted in extra chapter of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, no, it's not really part of that. It doesn't recapture the magic of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, it's just that Spidey appears to be wearing a Raimi skin. And it kind of builds off of the events of Spider-Man 1, but this is very much an ultimate Spider-Man TV show. And to its credit, it very much understands the core of what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man. Spider-Man may save the day and beat the bad guys, but it's Peter's personal life that must suffer for it, and sometimes that includes his friends suffering for it. And this show carried that through to its cancellation. My God, what a bleak outcome. Peter's first girlfriend is comatose, New York hates Spider-Man, Spider-Man's gone, and it doesn't feel cynical, it just feels true to what it's trying to achieve. And I do applaud it for that. But I must say, this show is pretty janky, and I'm not just talking about the aging of the animation. That was inevitable, and to be fair, to its credit, it's aged pretty well, but is it me, or is the voice acting in this just a little weird?
Craven's senses are too keen. We'd never have gotten close enough to use our powers.
What happened to the wimpy Spider-Man I loathe?
I'm not hiding.
How can they do that to me?
Or maybe...
When I heard it was Neil Patrick Harris voicing Spider-Man, I was pretty excited, but the delivery, even from him, is a little strange. And I guess it might be because it was a little earlier in his career, or it could be down to the takes that they chose. It's hard to say, but there's an amateur quality to everybody in this. Good amateur quality, to its credit, good amateur quality, but I don't know. Can't put my finger on it. I think this show kind of left a mark for being kind of the first Spider-Man show to actually show people getting killed as opposed to just kind of disappearing off screen. And there's also very heavy implications of sex as well. Sex. I can see why Kid Me didn't like this, but I have to say I really admire the cojones this show had. At the same time, it's pretty clear to see why it was cancelled. It was trying to appeal to that sort of MTV crowd, and I can't see that crowd being like, yeah, gang, let's all get together and watch Spider-Man, the TV series. I think they were worried that Aunt May would scare off a hip, young, adolescent audience, but I almost feel like the animation is gonna scare off a hip, young, adolescent audience more so than anything else. Not because animation is for kids, but it's so colorful, and like the city looks like it's made of Lego, and to be fair, like adolescent, I guess, like, or teenagers and stuff, there tends to be this sort of denial period where it's like, we're too old for that, we're too old for Spider-Man and candy-colored animation and stuff, we're too cool. Comic books, nerd crap. Truth be told, as a adult, I really didn't have any problems with this. I enjoyed it. It's a little janky. I'm gonna get comparisons kind of out of the way nice and quickly. I would say, next to other Spidey shows, this one doesn't hold up because it's very forgettable. It's not bad, like, say, Marvel's Spider-Man, or kinda irritating and overstimulating like Ultimate Spider-Man, but does it live up to like Spectacular Spider-Man, for example? Not even close. So overall, if you like Spider-Man, and you're feeling nostalgic for a bygone era when we didn't have some deadly virus and a malicious media spreading over-exaggerated and fake news about it, then this is the entertainment for you while in your quarantine. So, check it out. What do you guys think? Comment below and discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, why don't you head over to channelpup.net, where we got a blog page called Dr. Blogtopus, but as well as that, you can also buy merch, such as this awful t-shirt. But if you want to be a part of the super fun Kennel Club, why not hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below, you can check out the links to my Patreon and my Twitter. I think that would be pretty sweet for both of us. What do you say, champ? But in all seriousness now, thank you so much for watching, my fellow home dogs. Have a great day, because you and I both know you've earned it. I'll catch you next time. That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you? because you could get a way better costume from Zentai Zone. Check out their range of custom-made, tailored superhero costumes. Ridiculously good quality, value, and customization. Link is in the description below, as well as my coupon code CHANNELPUP, where you can get a discount off of your purchase. And while you're at it, why not get your suit designed by my talented buddy Dan from New Blood Dan's workshop? You can contact him via the link in the description below. Seriously guys, you do not want to miss out on your chance to be your favorite superhero and feel authentic and professional. And you don't want to miss out on that Channel Pup discount.